more than 170 million albums sold. A name so enormous that even people who have never knowingly listened to a single country song can tell you exactly who he is. Garth Brooks did something almost no entertainer has ever managed. He walked away from the entire machine at the absolute peak of his powers, vanished by choice, then returned years later on terms he dictated himself, and proved he could still pack stadiums to the rafters well into his 50s. He was not just a star. He was a force of nature who rewrote what was commercially possible for an entire genre. So how does a man like that find himself at 63 years old, tangled in a lawsuit stretching across 2 states, watching a brand new bar he poured 3 years of his life into get publicly shredded the very week it opened, hemorrhaging a sizable chunk of his most loyal fans over a single brand of beer, and reportedly weighing whether to leave the country entirely? Here is the part most people get wrong when they hear the headlines. This is not the story of one catastrophic afternoon. This is the story of several separate structures buckling at the same moment, and when you lay them side by side, the full picture is considerably uglier than the casual observer realizes. Start with the lawsuit, because that is the heaviest weight, and because the way he chose to handle it arguably made his position worse rather than better. On October 3, 2024, a complaint was filed in a Los Angeles court that sent an immediate jolt through the country music world. The woman behind it was identified in the court documents only as Jane Roe. She had worked for years as a hairstylist and makeup artist for both Garth Brooks and his wife, Trisha Yearwood. Her connection to the couple went back a long way. She began working for Yearwood in 1999, and Brooks brought her onto his own personal team in 2017. According to her account, the dynamic of that working relationship changed sharply once Brooks learned she was struggling through serious financial hardship. The filing alleges he saw that vulnerability and treated it as leverage. The specific allegations in the complaint are detailed and severe. Roe claims that in 2019, Brooks invited her to fly with him to Los Angeles for a Grammy tribute event. When they arrived, she says she discovered he had booked a single hotel suite containing 1 bed for the 2 of them. She alleges that inside that room, Brooks sexually assaulted her. The complaint then describes a separate incident at his home, where she claims he came out of a shower and forced her hands onto his body while making explicit comments. The filing lays out what her attorneys characterized as a pattern of behavior spanning from 2019 through 2024, encompassing sexual harassment, battery, and a calculated exploitation of her financial dependence on him. Those are the accusations. They remain accusations and proven in court, and Brooks has denied them completely. But what genuinely complicated the public narrative was the sequence of how Brooks responded, because he did not simply wait to be sued and then defend himself. He struck first. Before Roe ever filed anything publicly, Brooks had already filed his own lawsuit, quietly, in Mississippi, back in September of 2024, under the name John Doe. His legal team's argument was that she was attempting to extort him, demanding millions of dollars in exchange for staying silent. Brooks compared the situation to having a loaded gun pointed at his face. He said that paying her even a single dollar would be tantamount to confessing to something he did not do. He stated flatly that he was simply incapable of the conduct she described. From a purely strategic standpoint, the legal maneuvering that followed got messy fast. His team moved to have her California case thrown out and pushed aggressively to consolidate the entire dispute under the Mississippi court. That choice was not random. Mississippi has no anti-SLAPP protections, the legal safeguards that exist specifically to stop powerful people from using lawsuits to silence others. Without those protections in place, it would have been substantially harder for Roe to fight back publicly and speak about her claims. Her attorneys saw exactly what that meant and called the Mississippi filing a bad faith tactic engineered purely to muzzle her. The courts did not fully cooperate with Brooks. A federal judge in California denied his motion to dismiss in December of 2024, although the case was temporarily paused while the Mississippi matter played out. Then, in May of 2025, a judge declared the Mississippi case moot, effectively collapsing that entire strategy and leaving the California case standing unresolved. As of early 2026, both sides had formally requested a trial by jury. In plain terms, this thing is nowhere close to finished, and every month it drags onward makes it harder for Brooks to ever fully step out from under its shadow. To grasp the true weight of what is happening to him right now, though, you have to understand precisely what he built before any of it began, because the gap between what he constructed and where he currently stands is exactly what makes this story so jarring. He was born on February 7, 1962, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the youngest child in a blended family. Music was already in the blood. His mother, Colleen, had been a country singer in her own right, holding a recording deal at Capitol Records and appearing on Ozark Jubilee back in the 1950s. His father worked as a draftsman for an oil company. The household ran on weekly talent nights, where every child was expected to get up and perform. Young Garth picked up guitar and banjo, but through high school his real obsession was athletics. He played football, baseball, and ran track and field, and for a stretch he looked far more likely to chase a sports career than a musical one. That changed once the pull of performing in small bars and honky-tonks across Oklahoma overtook everything else in his life. He first arrived in Nashville in the 1980s, at a time when the city was absolutely overflowing with people chasing the identical dream. His first attempt at cracking Nashville, back in 1985, ended in flat-out failure, and he retreated home to Oklahoma with nothing to show for it. He enrolled at Oklahoma State University and graduated with a degree in advertising, a detail that looks almost prophetic in hindsight given how shrewdly he would later market himself. Then he tried Nashville again in 1987, and this time he stayed. What set him apart from the hundreds of other hopefuls clawing for the same break was not simply the quality of his voice or the strength of his songwriting, though both were real. It was the way he performed. Most country acts of that era kept their stage shows relatively restrained and traditional, rooted in a certain reserved dignity. Brooks tore that template up. He brought something far closer to a rock arena spectacle. He hurled himself across stages, smashed guitars, deployed pyrotechnics and elaborate lighting rigs, and generated a kind of kinetic, sweat-soaked energy that audiences had simply never associated with country music. Record executives who initially doubted him learned fast that he was not just another traditional act trying to squeeze into an existing mold. He was actively rewriting the entire definition of what a country concert could be. His self-titled debut album dropped in 1989 and started the ascent. No Fences followed in 1990 and exploded into one of the best-selling country albums in history. Then came Rope in the Wind in 1991, and this is where the scale of what he was doing became impossible to ignore. The album debuted at number 1 simultaneously on both the Billboard Country Chart and the all-genre Billboard 200, a feat no one had ever accomplished before. This was not a country record that gradually crossed over into the mainstream after building momentum. It hit both summits at the exact same instant, right out of the gate. The industry had genuinely never witnessed anything like it. By the mid-1990s, Brooks was filling stadiums that no country artist had ever come close to filling. His Central Park concert in August of 1997 drew an estimated 750,000 to 1 million people, ranking it among the largest concert audiences in all of American history. He stands as the only artist in music history to release 9 albums certified diamond by the Recording Industry Association of America, blowing past the previous record of 6 held by the Beatles. Sit with that comparison for a second. He has won 2 Grammy Awards, 17 American Music Awards, 22 Academy of Country Music Awards, and 10 Country Music Association Awards. He has been inducted into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and he became the youngest person ever to receive the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. His total worldwide album sales exceed 170 million, making him, by SoundScan's records, the best-selling solo artist in the entire history of American music. His net worth as of 2024 was estimated at roughly $400 million. He was not merely the biggest name in country. He was one of the most commercially successful recording artists the medium has ever produced, in any genre, ever. That is the platform now under strain. And the chasm between what he built and where things presently sit is precisely what makes this whole saga so striking to watch. Now layer in the bar, because while the lawsuit was detonating in the fall of 2024, an entirely separate disaster had already inflicted its own public relations damage earlier that same year, arriving at the worst conceivable moment. On March 7, 2024, Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood officially opened Friends in Low Places Bar and Honky Tonk at 411 Broadway in Nashville, planted right in the heart of the city's famous Lower Broadway entertainment district. The venue was colossal by any standard. It spans 54,715 square feet across 4 floors, making it the single largest honky tonk on the entire strip. The first floor was built around a sprawling live music stage. The second floor offered a balcony view overlooking the main stage along with additional seating. The third floor held event space that businesses had reserved years in advance. The fourth floor was an open-air rooftop bar called the Oasis, designed around a beach and tropical theme. There was even a members-only club tucked discreetly into the building. Yearwood personally designed the food menu, drawing on her cookbooks and her years working with the Food Network. The entire concept had been years in the making. Brooks bought the building in 2021 and spent 3 full years bringing it to life. He talked about it relentlessly in interviews, describing in granular detail the kind of place he envisioned. He said memorably that he wanted the Chick-fil-A of honky-tonks. He wanted people to walk through the door and instantly feel safe, feel welcomed, and feel as though everyone in the room had good manners. He specifically said he wanted classic country pouring out of that bar, naming George Strait and Merle Haggard as the precise sound he was reaching for. He wanted it to feel like a genuine dive bar, just blown up to an enormous scale. The whole opening was even captured in a docuseries that premiered on Amazon Prime Video the very same day the doors swung open. And then the reviews started rolling in within the first 2 weeks, and they told a sharply different story. The complaints were immediate and spread like wildfire across Google, Yelp, and social media. Customers described prices that felt steep even by Broadway's already inflated standards. One reviewer reported paying $37 for 2 drinks and compared it unfavorably to the neighboring bars. An undisclosed entertainment surcharge began appearing on bills without being posted anywhere visible, which spawned its own wave of irritation. Some customers reported being unable to pay with cash at the bar, a detail that struck many as bizarrely out of step for a place branding itself as a down-home honky-tonk. But the loudest, most consistent complaint of all was about the music. Multiple reviewers reported that during their visits, the bar was not playing country music at all. One described hearing the Flo write a song low. Another mentioned apple-bottom jeans playing while they were there. Others reported hearing Whitney Houston covers and songs by the Cranberries. One reviewer wrote that the place had zero country vibe whatsoever and looked more like a Manhattan nightclub than a Tennessee honky-tonk. These complaints carried extra sting precisely because Brooks himself had so specifically and so repeatedly described wanting classic country playing inside the venue. He had set the expectation with his own mouth, in interview after interview, and then a chunk of the early customers walked in to hear Flo Rida. Not all the feedback was negative, to be fair. Some visitors praised the live bands, described the energy as electric, and called the space itself genuinely impressive. The venue kept operating and remained one of the largest and most visible establishments on Lower Broadway. But the opening week narrative had already been written by the disappointed reviews, and those sour first impressions metastasized across the internet during the exact same year the lawsuit broke. For a man who had staked his entire reputation on delivering precisely what he promised, the distance between the vision he had so vividly painted and what some customers actually found when they walked through the door was a specific, targeted kind of damage. It hit him exactly where he was supposed to be strongest. And here is what makes the timing so brutal. This was already the second blow to his brand, because there was a third controversy that predated both the bar and the lawsuit, and it had already split his fan base in half. What a lot of people covering the current mess tend to skip right over is that Garth Brooks had already lost a significant portion of his core audience over a completely separate issue, months before the bar even opened, and well over a year before the lawsuit ever became public. In June of 2023, Brooks was sitting on a panel at the Billboard Country Live event in Nashville when he was asked about his upcoming bar. He mentioned, casually, that friends in low places would serve every brand of beer. Now, context is everything here. At that exact moment, Bud Light was in the middle of a massive consumer boycott driven by conservative fans, ignited after the brand ran a promotional partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer. This was not a minor cultural ripple. It was one of the most explosive consumer backlashes in recent memory, and country music was right at the center of it. Other country artists had already made loud, public statements refusing to serve Bud Light. Kid Rock had filmed himself shooting cases of it with a rifle. John Rich and Travis Tritt had both announced they would not serve it in their venues. For a large swath of the conservative country fan base, boycotting Bud Light had hardened into a cultural and political statement, a loyalty test, and many of them fully expected the biggest name in country music to fall in line behind it. Brooks went the opposite direction, And he did not do it quietly. He not only confirmed he would serve Bud Light at his bar, he added a comment that went viral almost instantly. He said that if people wanted to come to his bar, they were welcome, but they needed to come with love. Then he said that if someone couldn't manage to do that, well, there were plenty of other places on Lower Broadway they could go instead. The internet immediately ran with that second half, amplifying it as Brooks essentially telling boycotters to get lost in far less polite terms. That framing was not quite accurate in full context, but it spread that way regardless, and perception became reality. The reaction from a large portion of his fan base was swift and savage. People began filming themselves throwing out Garth Brooks albums and merchandise. Some posted photos of trash bins overflowing with his CDs. Forum posts and social media threads declared lifelong fan relationships officially over. Comment sections filled up with the phrase, "Go woke, go broke." A politician from New York publicly announced he was deleting every Brooks song from his music collection. Texas Governor Greg Abbott amplified what turned out to be a parody article claiming Brooks had been booed off a stage, a small but telling sign of how agitated the story had made the political right, even though the specific claim was completely fabricated. Brooks did not retreat. He doubled down in a Facebook livestream shortly afterward. He said diversity and inclusiveness had always been fundamental to who he was, and that he was not changing his position for anyone. He framed it as a principled stand and said he believed diversity was the answer to the problems facing the country. For the people who agreed with him, it was a rare and courageous moment for a country star to take such a clear stance. For the portion of his audience that had ridden with him since the early 1990s and held deeply conservative values, it felt like an outright betrayal. The Bud Light situation mattered far beyond the headlines it generated, because it landed directly on the audience that had been the literal backbone of his career for 30 straight years. Country music's core listener base in that era leaned heavily conservative, deeply traditional, and was living through one of the most politically charged moments in recent cultural history. Brooks's refusal to align with that audience's position did not just stir up a controversy that would blow over. It permanently shrank the number of people who considered themselves unconditional, ride-or-die fans. And that reduction was already locked in before the lawsuit landed, before the bar opened, and before any of the other troubles of 2024 began to pile on. So by the time the legal storm hit, his foundation had already been quietly cracked. Now consider what all of this was actually doing to the man himself, because none of the headlines capture what the past 18 months genuinely looked like for Garth Brooks as a human being, and the picture that emerges from people in his circle is considerably darker than his polished public appearances would suggest. Sources close to him during the height of the legal scrutiny described a man under a level of internal pressure with no real parallel anywhere in his career. Brooks has always been described by people who know him well as someone who reads every headline and feels every criticism deeply, even during the long stretches when criticism was minimal compared to what he was now facing. The lawsuit cut differently because it was not a disagreement about music or business or politics. It was a direct assault on his identity as a person, as a husband, and as someone who had constructed his entire public brand on being decent, generous, and trustworthy.